The Duke of Thornmire did not bow upon entering the ruined house. He looked at Diana Carey the way a man looks at a conclusion he has already reached. "Miss Carey," he said quietly, drawing off his gloves finger by finger, "I have come to propose marriage." The word marriage struck the cold drawing room like a crack of thunder. Diana stared. Beyond the glass, snow bore down against the windows of what had once been a proud merchant's home. Within, the hearth lay dead. The air bit sharply enough to burn the lungs. 3 days prior, the servants had departed. 2 days prior, the newspapers had laid bare her father's debts. And that very morning, her fiancé had walked away. Yet somehow, the most impossible moment of all was unfolding now. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I believe you are mistaken." Miles Garrett, Duke of Thornmire, did not appear mistaken. Tall, contained, wrapped in dark wool better suited to a ballroom than a frozen parlour, he occupied the centre of the room like a man long accustomed to owning whatever space he entered. "I am rarely mistaken," he replied. Diana's fingers clenched the back of the chair beside her. Barely an hour ago, she had been rereading the brief letter that severed her future. 8 months of promises, erased in 3 lines. Lord Philip Harcourt had not even delivered it himself. Now the most feared duke in London stood before her, offering matrimony. It felt like fate's cruelest jest. "I have no dowry," Diana said. "My father's estate is drowning in obligation." She forced herself to hold his gaze. "And society considers my family a disgrace." Miles Garrett's expression remained untouched. Silence pooled between them. Diana became suddenly conscious of everything. The threadbare carpet, the thin black dress she had worn since the funeral, the dull ache of hunger coiling low in her stomach. He noticed. She saw the exact moment he noticed, but he said nothing of it. Instead, he moved slowly toward the window, eyes drifting to the silent street where snow devoured the sound of passing carriages. 11, he said without turning. Her jaw tightened. He continued evenly. His voice carried no cruelty, only precision. Diana's nails pressed crescents into her palm. "And what concern is that of yours?" Now he turned, his eyes dark, unreadable. "Because," he said quietly, "I require a wife." The words carried the same weight another man might give to the acquisition of property. Diana nearly laughed. "Your Grace," she said, disbelief honing her voice, "you are a duke. London overflows with women eager to marry you." "Yes." "Then why," she pressed, "would you choose a ruined merchant's daughter?" For the first time, something moved across his face. Interest. "Because ruined women," he said steadily, "have fewer illusions." Her breath stalled. The insult was quiet but unmistakable. "You mean," she said slowly, "that I would make fewer demands?" "Precisely." Snow tapped against the glass. The cold seemed to deepen. Diana stepped closer. "Do you believe I am desperate enough to sell myself?" Miles Garrett regarded her with unnerving patience. "I believe," he said, "that you are practical. You are alone, without money, without allies. In 3 weeks, you will be forced from this house." Diana hated that he was right. "I am offering you protection," he said. "And what do you gain?" she demanded. That was when he smiled. Not a warm smile, the smile of a man who had already run every calculation. "A wife without expectations," he said softly. "No interfering relations, no romantic delusions." Only then did Diana fully grasp. This was not kindness, it was architecture. "You want obedience," she said. No, he corrected. I want honesty. He moved closer. Not threatening, but near enough that the air between them drew taut. I will shield you from every creditor in London, he said. You will never be cold or hungry again. His voice dropped a register. In return, you will become my duchess. Diana's heart struck painfully against her ribs. A duchess. The word felt absurd in this freezing room. She asked quietly. Something in his expression closed like a door. Miles Garrett said, the answer ought to have made refusal simple. But then she recalled Philip's letter, the funeral account still unpaid, Mrs. Albright's weary face that morning in the kitchen, and the hollow gnaw of hunger. 46, she said, measuring each word. 47. 48, he paused. 49. Then he walked out into the snow. The door shut behind him, and Diana Carey stood alone in the frozen drawing room, staring at the space where the most dangerous man in London had just offered her either salvation or ruin. Diana Carey did not sleep that night. The house was too silent, too hollow. Every clock ticked louder, every gust against the glass more accusatory. The fire had long since gone cold, and the chill spread through the rooms like a guest who refused to leave. She sat at the writing desk with Philip's letter still open before her. 3 lines. 3 lines that had erased a future she once believed certain. Given the recent circumstances involving your family, coward. Diana folded the paper slowly, placed it back on the desk. Not with anger. Anger demanded strength, and she had precious little remaining. Outside, snow kept falling over London. Inside, the truth bore down harder with each passing hour. She had no money, no allies, and by noon tomorrow she would either be the Duchess of Thornmire or a woman without a roof. Across the city, Miles Garrett sat alone in his Mayfair library. A single lamp lit the desk, where a stack of legal papers lay in precise order. The marriage contract. Richard Thornbury, his solicitor, stood on the far side of the room, adjusting his spectacles. Your Grace, the man began carefully, may I ask a personal question? Miles did not lift his gaze from the document before him. You may ask. Whether I answer is a separate matter. Thornbury cleared his throat. Miss Carey was, an unusual choice. Miles dipped his pen into the ink. That is precisely what makes her suitable. The solicitor hesitated. She possesses no fortune, no family influence, and society has already begun discussing her father's debts. Miles signed his name in a smooth, decisive stroke. Exactly. Thornbury frowned slightly. You are aware this marriage will provoke comment. Miles set the pen down and leaned back in his chair. I am the Duke of Thornmire. His tone stayed level. Society comments on everything I do. A pause stretched between them. At last Thornbury said quietly, Forgive my concern, Your Grace, but most men in your position would choose differently. Miles rose from the desk and crossed to the tall window overlooking the snowy square. Carriages crawled through the winter streets. London looked deceptively peaceful beneath its white covering. Most men, Miles said, want affection in their marriages. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. I do not. Thornbury watched him closely. Then why marry at all? Miles did not hesitate. Because a duke without a wife invites speculation. Speculation invites opportunists. My distant cousins already circle the estate like vultures, and an heir would silence them. Precisely. The solicitor nodded slowly. And Miss Carey? Miles's expression did not shift. Thornbury sighed. Miles allowed the faintest smile. Late the following morning, a black carriage rolled quietly through snow-covered streets toward the Carey house. Inside, Miles Garrett sat perfectly still. He did not doubt her decision, not because he thought himself irresistible, but because he understood desperation. He had seen it in her eyes. Pride had masked it well, but it lived there, sharp and bright beneath the surface. A woman who had lost everything. A woman who would sooner endure humiliation than beg. Those were the ones who survived, and survival was the only thing he offered. The carriage slowed. Through the frost-touched window, Miles saw the narrow street where the Carey house stood silent among its neighbours. The driver turned slightly. __quote _71 ___. Miles glanced once more at the folded marriage contract resting beside him. Then he stepped down from the carriage. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The front door of the house opened slowly, and Diana Carey appeared in the doorway. She wore the same black dress. Her face held no colour, yet every line of it was steady. Neither spoke. Then she closed the distance. __72, she said, her voice low. Miles regarded her for a long moment. Silence stretched between them. Diana glanced back once at the house behind her. The house where she had grown up, where her father's laughter had filled the dining room, where the feeling of safety had seemed permanent. Now the windows sat dark, the rooms cold, the future shapeless. She turned to Miles Garrett. Her chin rose. "I accept your proposal, Your Grace." Miles gave a single nod. No victory in it, no ease, only recognition. "Very well." He gestured toward the carriage. "Then the Reverend should not be kept waiting." Diana paused only a breath before laying her gloved fingers across his. And with that quiet act, the most feared Duke in London led his future Duchess into the carriage, toward a marriage forged not from affection, but from necessity. The chapel was smaller than she had pictured. Set behind the Duke of Thornmere's Mayfair residence, it was built of pale stone and lit by dim candles. The ceiling hung low overhead. The air carried traces of incense and oiled wood. No flowers at the altar, no music, no guests, only the Reverend, the Duke, and the woman he had chosen. Diana stood at the far end of the narrow aisle, gloved hands pressed together until the fabric creased. Mrs. Albright waited just behind her as witness. The loyal housekeeper had refused to let her go alone. Across the chapel, Hastings, Miles Garrett's butler, stood with the same quiet composure that seemed woven into every thread of the Duke's household. That was the whole of it. No family, no friends, no celebration. Diana had never pictured her wedding as the signing of a contract. Miles waited near the altar. Dark, formal coat, immaculate gloves. The candlelight cut sharp lines along his figure. He looked precisely as he always did, composed, controlled, untouched, as if marriage was simply the next item on a long register of obligations. When Diana moved forward, the faint whisper of her ivory gown carried through the stone walls. Mrs. Drummond had selected the dress that morning. The fit was flawless. It did not feel like her own. Miles watched her approach without shifting. Only when she reached him did he offer his arm. He murmured. The Reverend gave a soft cough and opened the ceremony. The ancient words drifted through the chapel like something borrowed from another age. He tried to anchor herself to them, but her mind pulled elsewhere. Yesterday she had been a ruined merchant's daughter, facing eviction. Now she stood beside one of the most powerful men in England, a man who had made clear that warmth held no place in their arrangement. "Your Grace," the Reverend prompted gently. Miles turned to face her. "I, Miles Edward Garrett, he said, his tone even, take thee, Diana Margaret Carey, to be my lawful wife. His voice did not falter. Diana made herself hold his gaze. His eyes were dark, unreadable. Miss Carey, the Reverend said, your turn. Diana drew a slow breath. I, Diana Margaret Carey, she began, her voice quieter but firm, take thee, Miles Edward Garrett, to be my lawful husband. The words felt foreign against her lips, unreal. To have and to hold, from this day forward. Promises neither of them expected to honour in the usual sense. The Reverend moved through the ritual with practised calm. When the moment arrived for the ring, Miles drew a plain gold band from his pocket. No jewels, no flourish. He took her hand. His fingers were warm against the winter air. Diana felt the slightest pressure in his grip as he guided the ring onto her finger. Diana, he said quietly. The Reverend offered a faint smile. You may kiss the bride. The chapel seemed to hold still. Miles hesitated, just a fraction. Then he leaned forward. The kiss was brief, polite, nearly ceremonial. His lips met hers with the restraint of a man determined to strip the gesture of meaning. But something unexpected happened. For the briefest instant, Miles Garrett stilled, as though something unforeseen had surfaced beneath the ceremony. Something unguarded. Then the moment sealed itself shut. He withdrew at once. It is done, the Reverend declared with warmth. I present His Grace and Her Grace, the Duke and Duchess of Thornmire. Diana's eyes dropped to the ring on her finger. A duchess. The words sat like iron on her chest. Miles signed the marriage register first, each letter precise, unhurried, controlled. Diana accepted the pen after him. Her fingers shook faintly as she committed her new name to paper for the first time. Diana Garrett. When she set the pen down, Miles studied the page. He murmured. She lifted her gaze, sharp. Something crossed his expression, amusement perhaps, and vanished. Outside, the carriage stood ready. Snow continued its slow descent through London's streets as the newly married pair emerged from the chapel. Miles extended his arm. Diana took it, not from trust, but from resolve. She had chosen this road. At the carriage door, she looked up at him. Your Grace? Yes. A pause before she spoke. Now that we are married, what comes next? Miles handed her up into the carriage without answering. Then he climbed in beside her and pulled the door shut. The wheels began to turn. You become the Duchess of Thornmire, he said evenly. And you? He held her gaze for a long, measured moment. I learn, Miles Garrett said quietly, whether marrying you was a mistake. The carriage carried them through London's white, dusted streets, and for the first time since the ceremony, Diana found herself wondering the very same thing. The Duke's London residence did not welcome her. It observed her. Marble floors threw back the glow of vast chandeliers. Tall portraits of Garrett ancestors looked down from every wall, silent, assured, immovable. Each piece of furniture held its place with rigid perfection, untouched by the careless disorder of real life. Diana moved through the entrance hall like a trespasser in a gallery. Hastings, the Duke's butler, guided her up the broad staircase without a wasted word. Quote 103, he said, opening a pair of doors. Rooms, plural. The suite held a sitting room, a dressing chamber, and a bedchamber larger than the entire upper floor of her father's house. A fire crackled in the hearth. For the first time in days, Warmth reached her bones. "You will dine with His Grace at 7 o'clock," Hastings continued. "And until then?" "The household is entirely at your disposal." A slight bow. He withdrew. The door closed behind him. Diana stood alone in the silence. She crossed to the tall windows overlooking Mayfair. Below, carriages threaded through the street. Ladies wrapped in velvet cloaks passed glowing shop fronts. London moved on as though nothing had shifted. And yet her entire existence had pivoted on a single word. A soft knock broke the quiet. The door opened before she could respond. A woman in her 40s entered, brisk, composed, eyes already cataloguing. "Mrs. Drummond," she announced, "housekeeper to His Grace." Her gaze swept Diana with professional precision. "We must attend to your wardrobe at once." "My wardrobe?" "You cannot present yourself in mourning indefinitely," Mrs. Drummond replied, as though stating a fact about weather. Diana nearly laughed. Society. 3 days ago, those same parlours had whispered about her father's debts. Now they would curtsy. The reversal felt like theatre. Dinner was laid that evening in a smaller room, lit by dozens of candles. Miles Garrett stood beside the fireplace when she entered. He turned at the sound of her steps. For a moment, nothing. His gaze travelled over the dark green gown, one Mrs. Drummond had insisted upon. He said finally. Diana seated herself at the long table. Servants materialized with the first course. For several minutes, only the sound of silver against porcelain. Diana could not endure it. She said at last. Miles looked up from his plate. The bluntness still cut, but there was something else. She pressed forward. Miles did not reply at once. He poured wine into his glass, slowly, deliberately. Diana said, her voice barely above a breath, quote 124. The candle flame wavered in the space between them. Silence held. Then Miles spoke. Quote 125. Diana waited. His gaze drifted to the far wall, to a portrait hanging there. A young woman, golden-haired, with eyes full of softness. Diana followed his eyes to the painting. Something shifted in his tone. A tightness settled behind Diana's ribs. I'm sorry. Miles gave a faint shrug. Fever. But his gaze remained fixed on the portrait a beat too long. She despised this house, he added, quieter now. Why? Because it was empty. The admission seemed to catch even him off guard. Diana watched him closely. You brought me here to fill it. Miles met her eyes. No. The denial came instantly. I brought you here because it was practical. A lie. Diana could feel it humming beneath the surface, but she let it rest. Instead, she asked gently, then why hang her portrait in the dining room? Miles settled deeper into his chair. For the same reason I married you. Which is? His gaze gained an edge. To remind myself, he said low, what happens when I let sentiment shape my choices. Cold words. But Diana noticed something else entirely. His fingers had closed around the wine glass, tight, white-knuckled, as though the memory still drew blood. And for the first time since their wedding, she wondered whether the dreaded Duke of Thornmire was not heartless at all, merely a man who had buried something deeply, painfully human. 3 days after the ceremony, the snow began its retreat. London's streets turned to slick grey beneath carriage wheels. The air carried the scent of coming rain rather than frost. Inside the Thornmire townhouse, however, nothing seemed to thaw. Miles Garrett departed each morning before the household fully stirred. He returned late, and though he never missed dinner with Diana, their exchanges stayed brief, courteous, precisely measured, exactly as the arrangement demanded. Yet the silence pressed against Diana harder with every passing day. That evening, the candles had already burned low in the dining room by the time Miles appeared. He peeled off his gloves with deliberate slowness before settling into his chair. Diana remarked. He answered simply. The servants filled his glass. Diana studied him across the length of the table. Quote, 145, quote, 146, quote, 147, she asked quietly. Miles glanced up. Quote, 148, quote, 149, quote, 150, quote, 151. She folded her hands carefully in her lap. Quote, 152. Miles frowned. Quote, 153. Quote, 154. Diana said softly, quote, 155. The question hung suspended between them. Miles set down his fork. Quote, 156. Quote, 157. Quote, she replied. Quote, 158. Quote, a faint line creased between his brows. Quote, 159. Quote, he said. Quote, 160. Quote, 161. Quote, her voice stayed even, but each word carried its own gravity. Her eyes found his directly. Miles said nothing. Diana rose slowly from the table and moved toward the window. Rain had begun tapping softly against the glass. She went on quietly. She turned to face him. Miles went still. He said with care. Diana hesitated because the truth felt far more dangerous than silence ever had. She said at last. Miles regarded her. The words struck harder than she had meant them to. For a long moment, Miles gave no reply. Then he stood from his chair. He said quietly. He crossed to the fireplace and fixed his gaze on the flames. His jaw tightened. Diana swallowed. She had not planned to speak it aloud, yet the word escaped before she could catch it. Miles turned sharply. She held his gaze. She said, the fire crackled softly. Nothing else stirred. Then Miles spoke, barely above a murmur. The words cut deeper than she intended. Something crossed his face, fleeting, almost like regret. He moved slowly back toward the table. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped. Diana said dryly. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched. Faint, nearly invisible, but it was the first trace of warmth she had witnessed in that face. He said. Their eyes met through the candlelight. Something shifted between them. Small, fragile, undeniable. Neither spoke of it, but Diana sensed a hairline crack forming in the armor the Duke of Thornmeyer had spent years forging. 2 days later, she discovered something she was never meant to find. It happened without intention. The morning hung grey and still, a London morning permanently caught between rain and fog. Diana drifted through the Thornmeyer library, a vast chamber of dark shelves and rolling ladders. It was the only room in the house that felt inhabited. Books, at least, did not feign indifference. She was searching for something to fill the long afternoon when she noticed a leather-bound journal resting half open on the desk. His desk. She should not have looked, she knew that, but one line had already seized her eye. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 191, underscore, underscore. Diana went still. Slowly, guiltily, she read the next sentence. Quote, 192. The air in the room seemed to cool. Diana closed the journal at once. So, that was the truth. Not merely a sister lost to illness. a guilt that had trailed him for years. Footsteps behind her. Diana turned sharply. Miles stood in the doorway. His gaze travelled from her face to the journal and back. For a moment, silence held them both. Diana said quietly. Miles crossed the room without hurry. His voice was steady, too steady. She braced for anger. It did not arrive. Instead, Miles lifted the journal and closed it with care. Quote, 195, quote, he said. Quote, 196, quote. Silence expanded between them. Quote, 197, quote. Diana said gently. Quote, 198, quote. Miles gave a soft laugh. It carried no warmth. The honesty startled her. Miles moved toward the tall window, his gaze fixed on the grey garden beyond. Quote, 202, quote, he said quietly. Quote, 203, quote. His hand pressed flat against the cold glass. Quote, 204, quote. Diana stepped closer. Quote, 205, quote, 206. His voice tightened. Quote, 207. The admission settled heavily over the room. Diana studied him. Quote, 208. Miles turned toward her. His eyes had darkened, not cold now, wounded. Diana took another step forward. A pause. The question was quiet, relentless. Miles hesitated. For the first time since she had known him, the Duke of Thornmere seemed uncertain. 214, he said slowly. 215. 216. 217. Silence again, then something unexpected. Diana blinked. Miles looked away. He stopped. The admission caught them both off guard. Diana felt her chest constrict. 222, she said softly. 223. Miles did not answer immediately. The truth was an uncomfortable thing. 224, he said at last. The word landed between them like fragile glass. Diana nodded slowly. Miles looked at her again. The hearth had burned low, leaving the room steeped in half-light. Diana replied.